And we had a massive flood in Boulder 2013. And nowadays, sadly, you look at the news and there's floods everywhere. And I bet, Anne, like me, when you see those things on the news, isn't your first thought like, oh my gosh, those people, poor people, they're going to have to deal with mold, right?
This is Doctor Talks. Welcome to another episode of Mycotoxin Mold and Chronic Illness Summit. I'm your host, Dr. Ann Shippey, and today we get to talk to Dr. Jill Carnahan. She is just one of the most incredible clinicians and also one of my favorite people on the planet. She is a functional medicine expert. She's board certified in family practice and also integrative holistic medicine. She's the founder of Flatiron Functional Medicine Clinic. She teaches, she speaks, she writes. She is on a mission to help humanity. And she has been very, very productive this last year. It's just mind-boggling how much she's gotten done. On top of all the incredible things she's doing all the time, she's finished a book and she's also accomplished a documentary. Thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you want to add to that? Did I miss anything important?
No, thank you, Anne. It is absolutely a pleasure to be with you. You're one of my favorite people. It is kind of like we get to have coffee publicly with everyone talking about mold today, right?
Mold has been such an important part of our journey, and you've had, some pretty big run-ins with health issues with breast cancer and Crohn's. And I just thought maybe we could start out with letting people know how mold's impacted you, and so that people can really get a flavor for this is personal, right?
Yeah. No, I always love to share story because we all have a story. And those listening out there, I'm sure some of you are listening because you have a story or someone you love is dealing with mold. So I'm going to tell you briefly where I've been because I think it'll frame my passion and purpose and some of the stuff I've learned. So I grew up on a farm in central Illinois. You would think it's the most idyllic Norman Rockwell-esque kind of environment. I was one of five children. My mother was a nurse and retired to raise the five children. We had organic food and, lots of like a half acre garden. We'd freeze vegetables and fruits and all kinds of things. So lots of wonderful, nourishing, holistic principles. But unbeknownst to me, this beautiful idyllic farm was slowly poisoning me. I was born with some difficult genetics. I always talk about toxic load as the idea of a bucket. And when that bucket starts to fill up over our lifetime and spill over the top, it typically presents with autoimmunity, cancer, and neurodegenerative things like Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's, or just cognitive dysfunction. Now, in that bucket, one of the things, which is the main topic of your summit, is mold and mycotoxins. I am sure, I don't know because I can't go back there and test when I was a child, but I'm sure we had a basement that was partially earth. We stored a lot of food there. I'm sure there was mold on the farm. And then grains, I don't know if people know about this, but many grains, they're stored in bins. And so you take the grain out of the field and then you have these big, huge grain bins on the farm where they store the grain until it's sold to whoever's taking that grain to use it for feed for animals or making corn chips or whatever else. And that grain in the storage often has a little moisture content. In fact, they actually would look at the moisture content and it's very, 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 very commonly contaminated with molds. Now, the dust off that grain, I was horrendously allergic to as a child. I don't think
And
it was
maybe it was actually the mold, right?
bingo, and I really look back and like, oh, I thought I was severely allergic to corn and soybeans. But if we know about grains, and this is one of the reasons I believe that people on a paleo diet, which is a grain-free diet, actually do better when they have autoimmune, is one of the reasons is because grains are the most highly contaminated food source in the US, at least with molds. So I'm framing that because I think my story with mold actually began from birth on the farm with these highly contaminated grains because I was so, so deathly allergic to those grains. And when the summer would come and they'd call this red dog, it was like dust and debris that would float around and get all over the grass, get all over everything we owned. I'm sure it was loaded with mold and mycotoxins. And I would just sneeze and sneeze and sneeze and sneeze, take a Benadryl, fall asleep for 6 hours, and it was miserable. So I think it began back then. And we also know now, part of my story is in medical school, 25 years old, I find a lump in and I was diagnosed in my third year of medical school at the age of 25 with a very aggressive breast cancer. Now, once again, I don't think necessarily that the mold caused the cancer, but it's very possible that mold exposure and pesticides, organophosphates, chemicals, which are endocrine disruptors, that means they have a hormone-like effect on the body, in conjunction with a mold that could have weakened immune system, might have been the perfect storm for me getting cancer at 25. I think mold was involved
It
well before
definitely
I
makes sense. It It's the kind of the perfect storm because it's
Yeah.
so unusual to get breast cancer that young and especially to get such an aggressive form.
Yeah, in fact, sadly now, many people have heard of 20-somethings, even like 16 or 18,
Oh
getting breast
gosh,
cancer, which is crazy
it's
early.
unheard of.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But at the time I was diagnosed about 20 years ago, I was the youngest one at my medical center to ever be diagnosed at 25. So even at that time, it was incredibly rare. So I get cancer. I go through incredibly aggressive 3-drug chemotherapy, lost all my hair, got really sick. And as we know, the chemotherapy can be damaging to the gut. And so 6 months after I get through the chemo, get through the radiation, get through the surgeries, I'm like, okay, I'm through a breast cancer. I'm bald. I'm malnourished. I'm pretty sick. Back into rotations. And 6 months into rotations, I literally passed out one day as I was taking a patient's blood pressure. I ended up in the ER myself, and that night I had emergency surgery for an abscess, and the next morning I wake up and the surgeon's like, "Jill, you have Crohn's disease." And Crohn's is autoimmune attack of the gut, so that was my first relay with autoimmunity, and I really got through that by learning the microbiome and learning how the gut interacts with that and changing my diet. I took out gluten and all inflammatory foods, and within a couple years, I was back to feeling really great and feeling like complete remission and really like Crohn's was a thing of the past. So then I moved to Colorado, started my practice, was doing great. I was hiking, I was skiing, I was enjoying life, feeling really like all the medical stuff, all the history of the illness was behind me. And we had a massive flood in Boulder 2013. And nowadays, sadly, you look at the news and there's floods everywhere. And I bet Anne, like me, when you see those things on the news, isn't your first thought like, oh my gosh, those poor people are going to have to deal with mold, right?
Absolutely, because most people don't know how to get things dried out and how to look for the hidden leaks. So, yeah, I mean, it's really become quite an
It
epidemic.
is, and more with the weather changes and stuff, I just see these floods, I'm like, "Oh no, that whole community is gonna be, like, really moldy in a year." So that's what happened in Boulder, we had this massive flood, everything got wet, we had, almost $1 billion of damage, and, the next year, I started having symptoms, my eyes would get red and irritated, my immune system crashed, and I got sick with everything that came by. My brain started having trouble with word finding, so I couldn't remember names.
Which is pretty scary as a doctor, like,
It
get your
is,
brain
right?
to work. You must have been petrified.
And I wasn't it's funny because this is one thing I give to patients dealing with mold that I just have such compassion. I'm sure you understand too. There's a bit of denial, and I think it's part of survival because mold affects this safe place we call home. It can be workplace too, so it can be other things, but some environment that you spend a lot of time in. And so there's a real trauma safety component about mold. And so it was no different with me because I knew if it was an environmental toxin like mold, it was in work or home. Eventually, what happened is I tested my urine. It was very high with trichosethines, which is from the nasty black Stachybotrys and Cattomium. And then we went in the basement of my office and found bulk samples of Stachybotrys. So it was really clear there was a connection. Literally, the day I got my urine sample and found out what was in the basement, I never set foot again in the office. Like I just literally, I left, I had 20 years of medical school textbooks in my library there, all my office furniture, and I just literally walked away. The only thing I took was patient records. I started over. I took a temporary office, not far from where I'm at now. But it's funny because this is relevant to your listeners. We know that you cannot get well if you have ongoing massive exposures. There's just no way that's the foundation. And yet, you and I know talking to patients, it's the hardest thing.
The hardest thing.
It's so hard. It's so hard for me to sit across from a patient and say, I think your house is moldy. You have to leave. You have to remediate. You have to do something because we
Right,
know it costs
and
money.
if you're sick enough, you may not be able to keep anything that
Right.
doesn't go in the dishwasher.
Correct. Yes, exactly. So there is a spectrum of what you have to do. Not everybody has to leave and walk away like I did. But what I realized is health is the resource that we can't buy health. And so it's that limited resource that, we can replace all those other things and it may not be fun. It may be expensive. It may be very inconvenient, but ultimately our health is so valuable. And I had learned that lesson from my 20s, early 20s because of the cancer, because I realized, you know what, that day I got told I had breast cancer, now I'm vibrant 20 years later and healthy overall. But I didn't know at that moment I got diagnosed with cancer if I'd have 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years. And when you face that mortality, anyone who's had that, it really changes perspective on living and showing up. And then when I came a decade later with mold, I realized I've gotta do whatever it takes to protect my health.
Yes, and things become less important and
Mhm.
you just do what it takes. And yeah, if you don't have your health, but you have money and you have relationships, it puts all of that at risk, right? You have to
Yes,
be able to
it
show
does.
up as your best self. So, and I think you're like me, where it's those hard lessons that we've had that have been the most valuable for us to really learn how to treat our patients. I'm sure during that following months, other than getting out of the mold and not returning, you learned a lot about how to help your body get healthy and stay healthy. What were the key things that helped you to get well other than leaving the office?
Yeah, so I want to talk about some of the struggles too, because what so often happens. So when we think about toxic load as the bucket analogy, and I'm sure other people have talked about this as well. I definitely like to talk about that because it's such a visual of like when we're born. And we know now that the cord blood of infants, this was 20 years ago in 2001, they were testing in Canada. They did a study on the cord blood of infants, and they found infants born out of the womb had over 200 chemicals in their blood already from mother's placenta, which means now 20 years later, it's only gotten worse. And I say that
We need
because
to repeat that study, honestly. I doubt anybody's going to fund it, but I really wish we would.
I know, because I can't imagine it's not double, triple, or worse, right?
Probably 10x. Based on
Yeah.
what, doing functional medicine almost 20 years, the differences
Yes,
in
and
what I'm
see,
seeing, it's pretty alarming.
I would totally agree. So this idea of load is that we're all swimming in toxic soup, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we eat, the buildings we're in, and it can be pretty depressing, right? But if we are aware of that, if you're conscious of that as a patient or just a consumer, and you're trying to not put more water in the bucket, so you're choosing clean air. I always say clean air, clean water, clean food. That's where it starts, and it can be so overwhelming. Supplements, IVs, what do I do? Start with the basics, and anyone can do this, even if you don't have a functional doctor, you're not sure where to start. Clean air. Make sure you have a good air filter right beside me here. Boom, Austin Air right in the corner there.
Mhm.
And I have
Yes.
5 of those in my office, and I have 3 at home, and I don't have that large of a house. So it's like I make sure that the Austin, the clean, and you could do another brand. I'm not brand loyal, but you want a good HEPA filter with a VOC filter because that VOC, volatile organic compounds, is the fumes, the smoke, the benzene from your off-gassing. We just read a study on if you have a gas stove at your house, which I still do, nothing wrong with that, but it will leak in off-gas benzene, and they've actually detected benzene levels in the air, even if it's not turned on. So that's one more VOC that we're not thinking about. And then the mold produces these mycotoxins that are 2.5 microns or smaller, which means they're smaller than a virus particle, and those will not be filtered by a HEPA filter. So if you have a furnace filter like my house is fine, you're not filtering those VOCs. So you need a filter that has a charcoal or zeolite internal mechanism to actually pull out those volatile organic compounds. So that's the clean air. Clean water, we'll make sure we're drinking clean source water. Last year in Colorado, they did a study of the water supplies here. 100% tested had too high of levels of PFAs, which is polyfluorinated.
No. Who did that study? That's a good one to look up. Do you remember? If
I
not, I
need
can
to,
get it from you later.
yeah, no, I don't know who did
'Cause
it, but
I
it was
don't think that many communities are actually doing the PFAS testing, so
right.
I think that's a really important point because that is
And when
really
I
one of
saw, I was
those
like,
things.
yeah. So if you don't know what PFAs are, this is basically polyfluorinated. They are called forever chemicals. And scientists cannot even calculate the half-life, which means for our generations and generations, we're going to have this. This is going to be there forever. Like we don't have a way to get rid of it, and we don't have a way to even know how long it lasts in the environment. And this is your Teflon, your Gore-Tex, those products, and they're in like the coatings on your takeout food. They are in all your camping and hiking gear that's waterproofed, so they get absorbed into our skin. They're in our food supply. Some of the cans are coated with this, and it is filtered by reverse osmosis or most carbon filters, so you can filter water. But if you're drinking tap water, even city water, it's in your water. It is in your water, so you need to be drinking
And
filtered water.
probably going through the skin with the showers and things.
Yes, yes. So it's like
Mhm. You
everywhere.
really need a whole house filter.
Yeah, yeah, whole house
Yeah,
filter, 100%. So clean air, clean water, clean food. And I'm going here, and I'll tell you in a minute where we went with the mold, but this foundation is so important because it's
love that.
accessible to the people listening. Again, not everybody has a functional medicine expert or can afford the specialty or the IVs. There's so many things you can do that are expensive. But I want to be very practical here and get at least a few things that everybody can do and think about. Clean air, clean water, clean food. And when you put good inputs in the bucket, you're keeping the water level at bay, and then in a moment, we'll talk about how do we actually bring that water level down, because as our bucket's filling, if we aren't consciously choosing every day to practice detox, we're behind the game and we're going to fill that bucket up. So you literally have to be aware of this. You don't have to be afraid. But if you're not practicing, so clean air, clean water, clean food, farm salmon, one of the most toxic things in the world. So if you're going out to eat and getting salmon twice a week, you're not doing yourself a favor unless it's wild caught. Usually that's sockeye, coho, sorry, and king. Those are the top three for wild, and it has to be wild because farmed is a whole nother issue because it contains PCBs. It contains all kinds of toxins. And then just local grown, if possible, organic as much as possible. If you can't afford it, look at the Dirty Dozen from Environmental Working Group and try to at least avoid those that are the most top sprayed. For example, bell peppers, strawberries, some of these things that celery, and those at the very least, make sure you're buying organic. And then do what you can to support your local farmers. Go to the farmers markets, get it fresh grown if possible. Maybe grow some herbs on your balcony if that's all you have. Whatever you can do to incorporate clean foods into your diet. And I say that foundation because that's where it starts. Now, with me with mold, it took me about 18 months to really start to see the difference. And the one thing I most want to talk about here was I got worse before I got better. And I think people need to be prepared for that because it's when your bucket is totally over your head, you're drowning in water. And all of a sudden you start to mobilize toxins and move them. That mobilization of toxins out of your tissues that's been accumulating into your bloodstream, where the liver and the kidneys can start to filter, causes reactions because you're actually getting them mobilized into your blood so your body can filter them. And if you mobilize too fast, for example, you do 45 minutes a day at 140 degrees in the sauna, you're going to feel horrendous. You're probably going to get, like I got rashes and hives, and you can't mobilize quicker than you can excrete. So it's really important that if you feel like you're getting worse, it doesn't mean something's
You
wrong. It doesn't mean
yeah,
you have to push harder, right? It's like,
you
so
gotta
there's,
kinda reassess, pause,
yeah,
reassess,
and I'm sure I'd love to
because
hear patients
you
what you do.
really shouldn't feel worse. If you feel worse, significantly worse, it just means there needs to be an adjustment to the plan, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm sure you're checking in with patients too, because if they're like I'll tell you my example. So I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna get this, push hard," which is like I do with everything, which is to my detriment sometimes. So I threw like 4 charcoal twice a day, like huge doses of binders and some prescription binders, and I started getting hives and from my neck down
Oh
for
my god.
months. My whole body was covered with rashes and hives, and the skin is a detox organ, right? So
Yes, your
clearly
body's trying to enlist the skin to help, right?
I was so sick from that. Like, looking back, I'm like, "Come on, Jill, you should have been more gentle."
But that's how we've learned, like, you and I both have done the things that kinda made sense at the time, and our bodies are like, "Oh."
And what we didn't know was the piece that, again, many mold sensitive, I talk about it in my book, but it's the highly sensitive thing, right? A lot of our patients, and both you and I, it's this gift. We always thought, at least for me, I thought it was a curse. Like, why am I so sensitive, environmentally, emotionally, everything? What it turns out is those of us who are highly sensitive, it's actually a gift because we see details that other people miss. And we're able to sit with a patient and maybe come up with solutions that other people would miss. But on the other side, as far as environmental toxin, mold, exposure, chemicals, you and I, and probably half of our patient population, and many of the listeners of the summit here, you are the sensitive person, you're the canary. And it feels like maybe a curse. There's beauty there. But when you're dealing with detox, when you're dealing with mold, you're going to be more sensitive. You might have to go more slowly. And what I really encourage you to do, which I didn't do, is listen to your body. Like, if I would just listen, my body was like screaming out, this is way too much. And I was just ignoring it and pushing through, right?
I think it's really a blessing because our bodies are telling us, they're informing us how to, it might be a really narrow path, but it's really helping us to find that narrow path. Whereas some people that don't have the sensitivities might be off the path, but their body's not able to let them know. So I think it's actually really good.
I agree,
Well, and
and
just at that conference that we were at recently, wake
yes.
up! All my mold symptoms started screaming at me in 24 hours of being in this hotel, and I'm like, okay, I need to go home and
Let me
listen to
tell
the
you, Anne,
recordings.
I remember we're walking together, right? I remember I told you someone had told me, a friend of ours that also detects mold, and she said, "This certain area of the hotel is really bad, be careful." And we were walking towards that, and you looked down, you said, "Look at my hands," right? You were, like, actually showing me physical, like, "Wow, I hope it's okay for me to share," but, like, and I was
Yeah.
having the same thing, like, some of my symptoms, it was literally as we're walking down the hall, we were seeing symptoms manifest right before our eyes of the exposure.
And so it's the blessing is that rather than just sitting there and letting the barrel fill up, our bodies were like, and we were able to not spend time in that part of the meeting. And for me, it
Yeah.
was just, go home early.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I had my liver enzymes raised after that, and it was really yeah, I looked at labs, I ate labs every 3 or 4 weeks, and my liver was up, and I'm like, "What in
Oh,
the world
Jill.
is mold?" Yeah. So it was cl I had objective data of that exposure, just like you.
Okay.
Yeah,
I want to come back to this resilience because I think let's go back to your
sure.
story of, what you felt like the things were that really helped you. But even we just have to keep building resilience. And
Yes.
so I want to come back to
I love that because that's
after.
really where we'll come back to that, and I'll just put a little teaser here. The key is any of you who either are just now getting into mold, you're like, what is this? Is so overwhelming. Maybe someone's right in the midst of detox and like, I don't feel well. This is so hard. Maybe someone's just at the end, like starting to get better. Or maybe it's like you and I, Ann, which we've been through a lot and I'm functioning fairly well. One of the keys that we want to leave you with is how do you get to the place where you might always be sensitive to mold? Ann and I still, we could tell anywhere we go, if there's mold, we know it. We're like mold dogs. But what I know now is I don't have fear around it. I can go in there and I know exactly what to do. I know what my threshold is. I know when I need to go home if it's going to be too much. And I now listen to my body and let it be the guide. And then I also know, which we can talk about next, is what do you do with exposure to actually reduce that bucket level? So that for me, I can usually within 24 hours or less turn myself around and feel back to normal. I didn't used to have that ability. So now I'm very confident in the fact that yes, I will feel mold. I'll be sensitive to mold, but it's not gonna take me out for months like it
Exactly.
and that's resilience, right?
That is resilience, that we can be faced with something pretty significant and bounce right back rather than getting taken out.
So, what did we do? Well, for me, interestingly, when you have a lot of oxidative stress, there's something called iNOS that gets upregulated, the NOx enzyme, when there's glyphosate, mold, metals, gluten, and any other toxin you could imagine. And when this gets upregulated, you take all the good things like NADPH that makes your NAD, which helps you restore and recover. And you take things, all these things become oxidized. And this oxidation is almost like if you were rusting inside your body. So like a car that gets oxidized, it literally starts to rust. That same kind of process called the Fenton reaction happens in our bodies and it's just this reactive oxygen. So what happens is if we start to take things that are oxidized and need recycling like too much NAD or glutathione, these are all wonderful antioxidants and they're powerhouses for many people. But if you put them in the midst of a body that is full of oxidative stress, they'll actually oxidize and do more harm than good. Same as like even hyperbaric, that's extra oxygen. It's amazing for so many people, but it does create oxidative stress if someone is already super oxidized. So all these beautiful, wonderful things, if you're like, I don't tolerate them, part of the reason might be this was for me in the beginning. I was so oxidized and so reactive, making reactive oxygen. All of these things made me worse, even glutathione. It was 2 years before I could take a dose of glutathione. I would get worse.
And it didn't matter which form of glutathione you tried, any
Matter.
type.
Now I can take it all day long because I'm not as sick and oxidized. But I mention that because we have these formulas and we have these things. You and I both do them, and they're perfectly appropriate. Glutathione for everybody, binders for everybody. But there's never one size fits all. And I know you're like
No.
individually treating, but
Mhm.
I'm really respectful for those people. Are like I can't tolerate that because that gives me a clue. And if you're out there listening, like yeah, everybody I listen to says take glutathione, but I feel worse with it. Listen to your body because there might be some oxidative stress that's actually you're not able to you're reducing it or oxidizing it and you're not able to reduce it, and so then you're creating more inflammatory mediators,
So
right?
what happened to you when you were taking the glutathione?
I would just feel worse. I'd feel more tired, more foggy.
Tired.
So normally people kind of feel like they wake up. In fact, right
Mhm.
before you, I had a patient in the office, a young man who had some mold exposure, and I gave him a sample of glutathione to try. And he's kind of coming kind of grumpy, kind of irritable, kind of like, as soon as he took this, he's like, it's the liquid stuff, right? And he just, like, right before my eyes, he lit up. He's like, "Mom, I feel so much better." I saw him like a light bulb turn
Oh,
on.
how fun.
Okay, that's awesome. This is gonna totally work for you because I witnessed it, and that's how it should be. You should
Mhm.
literally like, "Oh, my brain just turned on. I feel better, more energy," because glutathione helps you mobilize and get rid of these toxins, and it works for the whole bucket. That's the great thing. Glutathione is a master antioxidant, so it works with almost every pathway. The other caveat there is I would say your liver, gallbladder, we talk a lot about that, but if your kidneys aren't working, if your skin or so all these other organs need to work,
Mhm.
and bile is huge in this process. So basically, liver takes the nasty mycotoxins and converts them into from a lipophilic, a fat soluble substance that's stuck in your tissues, into a water soluble substance so it can be excreted. and it gets excreted through bile. But many people, number one, don't produce enough bile. And symptoms of that would be trouble with fatty foods, maybe indigestion, maybe like diarrhea with fatty foods, maybe SIBO or SIFO, small intestinal fungal or
Mm.
bacterial overgrowth, because those are signs of not a clean small bowel. And I could name a dozen others, but mold will make your bile kind of sticky. And so often cholagogues, which are like bitters, can be really helpful for making that bile flow better. We actually use bile acid binders by prescription, like well-called cholestyramine in some people, because we're pulling that bile out. And things like taurine and glycine, which are precursors to bile. If someone can't tolerate binders, what we can do is start with that bile support, like with glycine and taurine, and just give them those nourishing. And usually people don't react. You certainly could to anything, but those are very simple and safe ways to get someone started to flow if they're not tolerating the glutathione or the binders.
Beautiful. And what do you like to do for kidney support?
Kidney, there's a product called Rentone. It's a herbal.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm,
really great. And then there's the German homeopathics Picana drainage remedies. And they have
mhm,
Renilix and eye tires for the lymph, and then Hepats for the liver. Those are kind of like a trio. I've
mhm.
learned all these tips from my naturopathic friends because they're so good at these more drainage.
Homeopathic. So interesting. Okay.
And then hydration, of course, right?
The clean water.
Yes, and you know what, let's talk about that really quickly because mold does this really weird things. It does a lot of really bad things, like it trashes your detox, which is making the mold worse. One thing it does is it creates this process where you aren't regulating your volume. So typically ADH will go down. That's your regulatory vasopressin for regulation of volume. And so you drink and you pee and you drink and you pee and you can't keep volume in your vascular system. You might get dizzy or lightheaded when you stand up. You might be dehydrated chronically with dry skin and your body can't maintain volume. And this is where if the kidneys get too dry, they don't do so well. It's like running a car without any oil in the engine and you burn up the motor. If you don't have enough hydration, your kidneys just don't like it. So part of this kidney support is actually just hydration with electrolytes, which usually really helps because the ADH isn't able to control that. And if you add a little bit of salt to your water or electrolytes, you'll be able to maintain that volume better and support your kidneys.
Beautiful. So those are probably just good basics for just about anybody. And then you like to layer on the other binders and glutathione and that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
so anything that makes glutathione, again, we talked about if you don't tolerate taurine and glycine are great for bile, but you can also
Mhm.
use precursors of glutathione. That would be like NAC, lipoic acid, milk thistle, selenium. It'll support that liver. And then I'm sure you like phosphatidylcholine.
That's my
Yeah.
desert island. Other than glutathione, it's the
Mhm.
like, if I can only have a couple things on a desert island, the phosphatidylcholine. Would you like to explain why?
PC is the piece of all of our membranes, our cell signaling, our neurotransmitters, our cellular membranes, and they're especially important in the mitochondria. Mitochondria are the energy powerhouses of each cell. And often, when we get these toxins, including mold, all the membranes get damaged. We have leaky brain, leaky gut, leaky mitochondria, and leaky tissues. And when those membranes and phospholipids are damaged, you can replace them with the healthy phospholipid, which is PC or phosphatidylcholine. You can do that orally, you can do it IV. The one caution about orally is if you have a really damaged gut and lots of dysbiosis like bacteria and fungus and junk in your gut, PC by nature takes things across barriers. It's like a boat. And so if you put PC in before your gut is in a decently healthy state, you could transfer some of the bad guys in your gut into your bloodstream. So I always wait to make sure the gut's in a decent spot and not super permeable. And then you can do oral PC, but you can always bypass. And I'm sure, do you do IV PC?
I do, I love it.
I think that's more
Especially for the
powerful.
sickest patients, that seems to give them a lifeboat to get better quicker. How about you?
Yes, yes. I don't do it in my office, but I refer people because I feel like you do. It's such a powerhouse. It's one of the most there's a German researcher who shared with ICI before, I can't remember his name, so forgive me for but he talks about DNA addicts. Basically, they'll test in Germany what kinds of chemicals are affecting your DNA. And literally they test for mold and aspergillus and chemicals and metals and all the stuff that's filling our bucket. But ultimately, the solution for all of this is PC.
It makes a huge difference. It's so fun to do the before and after on that
Yeah.
test, the IGL test, and see what a miraculous improvement and so much
Yeah.
so quickly. And you can do it without the IVs, but it just takes longer.
Yeah, it's just a really quick
Yeah.
mechanism. you know.
Are there any other of your favorites that you want to cover before we move into resilience?
Let's see. I guess, okay, let's talk about, so we talked about, I think about mold with mobilization and excretion, and we briefly touched on that. We talked about all these ways to mobilize liver, kidneys, all that great stuff. But if you mobilize too quickly and you aren't excreting, you get sick like I did, you get hives. So the excretion part, I think, is a little bit more subtle and not as commonly talked about. And this would be dry brushing, stimulating lymphatics,
Mhm.
lymphatic drainage,
Yeah.
lymphatic massage, and even lymphatic essential oils and things, Epsom salt baths, infrared sauna, and any sort of, a lot of times they're manual therapies. A lot of times they're more subtle, more gentle, but you want to really think about how, and binders can help with excretion too. But if you are getting sick or not doing well, you usually pull back on the mobilization and you increase the excretion. And again, sweating can help, lymphatic drainage, anything that would help lymphatic drainage would help. Anything where you're actually excreting and allowing your body to catch up is really crucial.
Yeah, I think the lymphatic piece is just one of those that's overlooked so often and just so important because it's just such an important way to actually get the toxins moving out of the tissues. So thank you for really emphasizing that.
Yeah, and I'll just mention, because you and I are both conventionally trained, we have this
Mhm.
great education, but there's little pieces that we're lacking. We didn't get a ton of nutritional training. Now you and I have done a ton since, so you're an expert, and hopefully I'm too, but
Yeah, and it's so fun, right? Because we can just there's always something more to learn about it.
right, right. As I mentioned lymphatics, I mean, it was mentioned in passing, but I don't remember much at all about, like, I was like, "What are
I
the
remember kind of seeing a diagram,
Right,
the muscular system, like how it kind of
right,
runs along the same
right.
pathways, but, in anatomy, you
Yeah,
don't really even look for the lymph system
exactly.
or the fascia.
Yes, yes, and those 2 are so critical, and I mention that because if you're going to a conventional doctor, maybe even someone who knows mold, be kind because they probably don't know a lot about lymphatics. Now again, Anne, you and I have learned, and we use this in our practices, but it's one of those things that conventional medicine is not very up on understanding. Most of my information about true lymphatic drainage, I forgot castor oil packs, that's another
Oh,
really good
yeah.
one, right? That I've learned from my naturopathic friends.
Beautiful. All right. So, keep let's keep bumping resilience because I know trauma is one of the things that really has piqued your interest. You've done an amazing job of addressing that in your book, and I know it's near and dear to your heart. So I want to make sure we have some time to talk about the role of trauma and mold.
So this was something I knew intuitively and saw patients over and over. And then as I did the research, it just confirmed. And I'm not the only one out there. There's a lot of other people talking about it, but we'll talk about it today and how it connects. So, first of all, so far, I will say clinically 100% of patients who I've treated for mold related illness, which is a lot of people, have some form of trauma. And what happens is, even if they've done all their work, they have a therapist, they have great relationships, supportive environment, and they're really healthy in that way, there is a traumatic component, a PTSD component of mold. And like I said, I say 100% because never seen this not be true, including myself, where there's some PTSD component of mold. So as I'm writing my book, I was researching and trying to figure out, like, what is this? And Anne is actually in the research published about how chemicals, literally in our olfactory system, as we inhale chemicals into our nose, the cribriform plate, which is this like porous plate into the HPA axis in our brain, there's literally evidence for the chemical trigger of noxious smells and mold into our brain, triggering the amygdala and the trauma fight or flight response. So it's not just that we're afraid of that exposure and getting sick again, although that can be very real for people. It's literally that inhalation gets triggered with the amygdala response in our brain, a fight or flight response.
And
And
it
it,
kind of makes sense, from a survival mechanism.
yes,
If there is a noxious something happening, our bodies need to instinctually get away from it, right? But the
yes.
problem is like, I think from a survival mechanism, hunter gatherer times, like it's a quick exposure, whereas with the mold, it's so long term. So it really gets that amygdala poisoned at the same time, right?
Yes, yes, and so when I understood this, like, "Oh, no wonder." Because again, yeah, we all have a little bit of trauma we can deal with and work with, and if we're, aware and awake, we can get those kinds of things, and we'll talk about some resilient strategies there. But the truth is, even if you're healthy and well-adjusted and great relationships, it's still traumatic to have the mold exposure, and especially if you get sick from it. So what I do with the treatment is I always involve limbic, loop training. I think you were the one who said limbic loop or whatever words we use for that is this amygdala response. And how do we basically neutralize that as part of the protocol? Because what happens is when you first get exposed to mold, and there's actually some mechanisms that create more I have all the data in the book. It talked about antisocial behavior. If I look back at right after my mold, I mean, all I could do was go to work, go home, sleep, and like I could barely function to get through that really sick time. I wasn't
Amazing that you were able to keep going.
it kinda is to me. I'm like, "How did I do
Mm,
that?" Because I was really, really sick, and the
yeah.
thing about it too, I really pulled in, almost like anything like lights, sound, too much stimulation was all too much for my nervous system at the time of healing, and so I wasn't going out to dinner with friends, I wasn't traveling that much, all the extra stuff was like, "I can't deal with that, let me just." So there's an and I've seen this especially with Chitomium, there's a sense of overwhelm that comes from the mycotoxin exposure that adds to the burden of the illness, in the sense of everything feels overwhelming. And it could be, I don't know the exact mechanism. I suspect it's part of literally your brain circuits are like, can't deal with this.
I
Like
have to
there's a
share this new study with you that I found on Chitomium. They looked at like hundreds of different chemicals that are made by Chitomium and like it went up, like all the different functions that they did. So we'll probably figure out the answer to the question why if we look at this
I
together.
can't wait because I know I
Mhm.
saw it and then I felt it. And even last summer, the neighbor's fridge leaked. It went under my condo floor. I didn't know it. There's Kentomi in my condo. And I felt like I was almost going to have like a nervous breakdown. And I'm not that kind of person. I'm not usually anxious. I'm pretty happy, very optimistic. And I was like, what is wrong? Well, we found Chitomium. And I was like, oh, no wonder that darn Chitomium. Because whenever I've had exposure to Chitomium, I have the sense of like my brain is it's not crossing wires correctly and I'm feeling overwhelmed. And even depression, anxiety, that's not me, but certain molds will cause very bizarre, like down, sad, overwhelmed. So I just want to say that because if you've experienced mold and you're like, wow, I'm so depressed, or I mean, even suicidality, some of
Yes,
these
that is so important.
yeah.
Anytime somebody becomes suicidal, we really have to look for mold.
Yes, and just I have such compassion for you because even for me, who I haven't had those kinds of disorders in the past, but when I've had mold, I'm like, oh, this must be what it's like to be depressed, or whatever those things are. And what I find it also does is it sabotages our insight. So our insight is our ability to, in real time, tell that there is something wrong here. And we might kind of know, but even to this day, it sometimes takes me a few hours or at least 30 to 60 minutes to realize, oh, this is mold. And it's because the mold sabotages that quick insight ability that I would normally have without mold. Like, oh, this is what's wrong. I need to fix this. It's almost like this kind of vague sense of like, whoa, what is going on? And then
Disorientation.
yes, that's a perfect word. So overwhelm common, disorientation common, depression, anxiety common because it affects
OCD is so common
yes.
in that situation too.
Yeah. So if you're experiencing these things, these are very real and they're very treatable. And the great news is I look back and I'm like, I wonder how much of suicide, bipolar, depression, anxiety, I wonder there's got to be a decent percentage that's related to mold.
Absolutely, especially since we have this epidemic going on where so many buildings have pretty significant
Yeah.
mold in them. Yeah.
So resilience, how do we deal with this? First of all, I always want to teach patients to connect with symptoms with the real-time exposure in the sense of the more I can empower a patient to know, just like you and I, Ann, at the hotel, we both have a very clear, like, this is what mold feels like to me. I'll feel pressure in my sinuses. I'll feel a little disoriented and confused, maybe some overwhelm, like we said. I'll feel more tired or foggy. As soon as I wake up the next day, I'm really achy.
I was so achy at that conference,
Yeah.
like, I just felt like my body had been run over by a truck.
Yeah, like, "Whoa, what is going on?"
Mhm.
Bloated, just like I
Yeah.
normally don't have bloating, like lots of bloating. And so for you as a patient, what you wanna do is find what's your signature for this is part of resilience, because if you can identify and the difficulty is if we look at molds and mycotoxins, there's hundreds of chemicals produced. So even for me, I have personalities of mold, and I can almost tell now which mold I'm exposed to by the symptoms. Yeah, so you probably I'm like, "Oh, Chitomium," whatever, the overwhelm is Chitomium, or the Stachy's like dark sadness, and so these things and that's just for me. But if you can find a signature for you over time of what it feels like to be exposed with mold, what you can do with that is that gives you resilience because just like Ann and I, we walk through this hotel, we're like, ooh, mold alert. And we know, okay, I go back to my hotel room. I take glutathione, I take binders. If I can sauna or Epsom salt bath anywhere in the hotel, I do that. If I can get fresh air outside, open my windows. And then if I can go home as soon as possible, that's also good, right? Or change rooms if it's in my room. This was in hallways, but if it was in a hotel room, you change your room. So if you as a patient
How
can
many times would you say you've changed hotel rooms?
many,
Me
many.
too.
Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about because so many of us, especially women, we've been taught to be conscientious, be kind, be accommodating. You have to be very freaking bold about what you need. And there's nothing wrong with that. I always say it's okay to be high maintenance if you're high performance. And I don't apologize anymore for my 2 bags for the weekend or for my need to change room because it's about your health. So I want to give you permission if you're listening, be high maintenance and high performance if you need to be. Ask for a new room, ask for accommodations, ask for windows that open, ask for a fridge in your room so you can have good, clean food. Whatever you need, it's appropriate and it's okay to ask for it.
Love that. That's so important. And I do think that that's been one of the gifts of, you know, when we look back at these illnesses and like, what are the silver linings? That is one of the gifts, right? Is being able to ask in certain situations for what you really do need.
It is, and that's
Yeah.
where mold can be a gift to, like, empower us and realize that and then you also realize, like before, when you first get into mold, it's you get so sick and it's so scary, but as you work with this trauma so back to that trauma piece, every single mold patient, I tell limbic deactivation syndrome sorry, I can't talk. Limbic deactivation types of solutions, and those could be anything from DNRS, brain tap, Gupta protocol, craniosacral therapy, neurolinguistic programming, working with a somatic based therapist. And the more you understand about the somatic system, amygdala, and how it correlates is going to help you. So I recommend reading people like Peter Levine, Gabor Mate. The latest book on Gabor Mate is phenomenal. Oprah just wrote a book on uh, why did this happen to me? And it's all about childhood trauma. It's so good. So
Oh,
all
I
of these
haven't seen that. That's a good
really, really
recommendation.
good. Yeah. So all of these different
Nobody expects someone like Oprah to have,
right, right.
um,
She shares openly, and it's such a great, like, primer. The more you understand, the more then you can start to see, "Oh, I have this pattern," and you have the power to change that. None of this is permanent.
that's beautiful. Yeah, I think about as, you know, we get entrenched in these neural pathways. It's just kind of the way we've done things. It's how we've survived. It's what we've done. And so
Mhm.
if we can see where that we're in the trench, then we can jump ourselves out of it and make a new pathway.
Yeah. Yeah, so the great thing about neuroplasticity is we have the potential to reverse this. That's what it means is we used to think our brains were just gonna be that way, and we're gonna age, and we're gonna lose our memory. All these symptoms are gonna be permanent. But the truth is all of this we're talking about has the potential to be reversed.
Beautiful. I'd love to spend a couple minutes on MCAS because I know that that's been an important part of your journey.
Yeah, so what we know is some of the great leaders, Lawrence Afrin and Theo Theourides have been great teachers of mast cell activation, and they're conventionally trained. So they weren't like trained in the mold related illness, but both of them, speaking to them, have said over and over, mold is definitely the biggest trigger of mast cell activation. And if you've never heard that term, it's very, very common, and especially post COVID, because what happens is our mast cells are our primordial cells to protect us from the environment. So they're kind of out there scavenging and looking for things that might be harmful to us. And what's happened is as our buckets have loaded up and our environmental toxic load has increased, they have become more and more reactive. So we're seeing many more patients that have mast cell activation just because they're being triggered. And mast cells particularly don't like mold. So that's a very, very common thing for them to be triggered by mold. And then they'll throw out their contents, which include prostaglandins, histamines, and 1,000 other things that create inflammation, swelling of tissues, permeability of tissues, and overall dysfunction, increased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, and I could go on and on. So typically people will present with brain fog, rashes, hives, itching, activation of old infections, gut permeability issues, all of a sudden increased sensitivity to foods, racing heart rate, POT symptoms, which could be as they stand up, they get dizzy, lightheaded, dysautonomia, where they're just autonomic nervous system, their blood pressure, their heart rate, nothing's working right. And some people are so sick that they're in bed, they can't even get up and go anywhere because they're so dysautonomic, which means they can't regulate pressure when they stand up and they get really, really exhausted. And the worst of it for me, I would run blood pressures as low as 75 over 45,
Oh my
like
gosh,
so
Jill. How did you function?
crazy. I know. Well, it's funny. This is a little funny thing about Cotomium. Always called it the narcoleptic mold because if I would get exposed, I'm like, I got to go lay down now. I'm so tired. Well, I realized it was dropping my blood pressure. No
Oh,
wonder I had to go
yeah.
lay down because I couldn't keep
You had
standing up.
you had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
You were already so low. If you went lower, you can't
Yeah. Well, now my
stand up.
normal is 90 over 60, but if I get below that, then I start to be dizzy or lightheaded. So yeah, that's a whole nother lecture on nitric oxide and vasodilation and pathways.
Yeah.
But The bottom line is a lot of these mast cell activations will create many, many very severe symptoms. And if you think about like where to start if you're sick with mold, you kind of have to think about limbic system right away and start
Yes.
to work that in and at least create so there's not a lot of fear around it. And then you do have to address mast cell right at the top because often these patients can't tolerate herbs or supplements or binders or things until you stabilize the mast cells. So what do you do? Well, natural mast cell stabilizers are things like quercetin, luteolin, and nettles, Chinese skullcap. So I often use combinations of natural things. And then with these patients, I find they often need a layered multi-drug approach for hitting all the pathways. So H1 blockers, H2 blockers, mast cell stabilizers, and some of the common ones are, the allergy medicines like Zyrtec, Allegra, Claritin, Benadryl, Xyzal, all of those. And then maybe adding something like ranitidine for the H2 blocker. And then mast cell stabilizers, things like montelukast or ketotifen are powerful. Cromolyn can help with food sensitivities. DAO enzyme can also help break down histamine. Adding methylation support can help break down histamine. So you're kind of going at it as breaking down the histamine, blocking the histamine, stabilizing the mast cells, helping DAO enzyme, which will break down histamine, low histamine diet. And you kind of often need all of that to
Yes.
stay.
It's a especially when people are as sick as
Yes.
what you described with, hardly getting out of bed. If you just hit one or two of the mechanisms, it's not enough.
Now, I want to say a few that you may not have heard. I'm sure you have, but the listeners may not have heard before. Stimulants have their place, and stimulants are off-label use for POTS. So sometimes I'll use stimulants if someone has severe POTS because that's actually a pressor. So it's something that will increase epinephrine, norepinephrine, and raise the blood pressure in severe cases. Methylene blue. I've been a huge fan of this.
Oh,
This is
yeah.
an antimicrobial that's been around for 200 years. We've used it for Bartonella and infections, but it actually can actually create some issues with the nitric oxide, so people are more stable with the POTS as well. So they're two little things that can be helpful for certain patients.
Beautiful. Okay. So I would love to talk a little bit about your book because I think it's such a gift to patients to really do a lot of what we're all about, which is to create inspiration and hope of recovering from these illnesses. So I'd
Uh,
love if you just share a little bit about your book. I have it here. I loved it. It's so awesome.
Thank you. Well, it's really different from a lot of them out there, only in the sense of I was told that you can't write your story unless you're Oprah Winfrey or Brene Brown or someone really famous. But in my heart, I was following my intuition because I thought stories are connective tissue. And even as we tell story here today, and I'm sure a lot of your guests, story is what people relate to because you can present all the facts in the world, but when you have a real person, a real journey, it actually all of a sudden we're like, oh, I'm not alone. And part of our place in this world is to really realize we're all one and we're not alone. And even here today, I hope if there's one thing you take away, it's that there's hope and that we are here right there with you. You're not alone in the suffering. And what I realized is my path as a healer happened to involve a lot of suffering and a lot of illness. And the power of the suffering comes in understanding the purpose and meaning and then retelling your story so that other people can relate. So what I did in the book is I wrote my story and I shared a lot of very personal, vulnerable points of struggling with being enough, working too hard, and my addiction to work as an addiction like any other. How do I deal with that? How do I deal with wanting to be strong and resourceful, but also feeling sensitive and weak on the inside? How do I deal with picking really unhealthy relationships? And I share some of them in there. It's very telling. It's
You're
so
so
funny.
brave to share all this. Like I really admire your, the amount of compassion that comes through and the just the integrity and the intimacy of sharing your journey. So thank you.
Thank you. The hope is just that a reader might see parts of themselves and be encouraged. And then the great part is there's sidebars, tons of them on mold. It's actually there's a practical piece too if you just want to read the sidebars and not my story, that's okay too. And you'll just get the how to for how to detect mold, what to do if you're mold exposed. So there's a whole chapter called Transforming Toxicity, all about how I recovered from mold related illness.
It's really well done. I think it's I highly recommend to read and I think people will walk away with some really good tools and understanding and inspiration for sure. And then your documentary, I loved getting to see that because, I got to see where you grew up and where you went to med school and where you dealt with cancer and, really made your story so real and so personable. So if you could just share a little bit about the documentary too.
Sure. So that was another unexpected miracle, but we have a documentary now. It's in the film festivals and it will be distributed. Right now, we're waiting to see how that'll happen. If you want to just see the trailer and just find out where it might be playing, drpatientmovie.com is the website, and the trailer's on there, so you can see that. And I'm sure we'll be putting out there to the world when it's coming out. And right now, it's just in the film festivals.
It's really beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else before we share where to find you and all your good, amazing information that can keep people moving and inspired?
Thank you, Anne. Well, just as always, it's such a pleasure to be here with you. And if you guys don't know the amazing powerhouse that Anne Chippy is in the world, I love you so much. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for having me today. And if there's any message I want to leave with you is this stuff can feel totally overwhelming. And I think mold more than anything else, because it sabotages your brain. That's why I wanted to talk about that, because in the midst of it, it may feel hopeless. It may feel like you'll never get out of it, but there's hope and there is reversal and there is resilience. And so no matter where you are in your journey or where your friends or family are, and you might be listening for them, there is always hope. And I just want to encourage you, don't give up no matter how dark the times seem. Always grasp for that light and for that answer and for that wisdom and for that hope, because there is always a chance to turn things around.
Yeah, no matter how dark things seem, there is a light at the
Yes.
end of the tunnel for sure. So thank you for that. And you do such I love your blogs. So I really recommend people get on your website and read the blogs. So you're just constantly putting out great information on your website. So if you want to share your website and then Instagram
Sure. Thank
handle.
you. And it's just my name. So jillcarnahan.com, and it's all free there. So yeah, lots of resources for mold, especially. I write a lot about mold. And then Instagram is just Dr. Jill Carnahan.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jill. This was just a great, we covered so much information and lots of great tips and tools for people. And I think really covered a lot of the most important information for people to know what they need to know to really make progress in getting better and becoming resilient.
Yes. Thank you, Anne. As always, it's a joy to talk to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jill.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. Talks. We hope today's episode has enlightened and inspired you on your path to optimal health. Each day is a new opportunity to make choices that empower your well-being. For more insights and strategies, subscribe to our podcast and visit our website, www.drtalks.com. Stay connected, stay healthy, and join us next time on Dr. Talks. Real talks from real doctors on the issues that matter to you most.